Hello, everyone. Welcome to the second episode of the Trivial History Podcast. Our subject today is trick-or-treating. Many Americans have heard of, and quite likely participated in, the Halloween tradition of going door-to-door trick-or-treating. These days, decorations, candy, and costumes have all made Halloween a major holiday, with Business Insider reporting over 160 million Americans participating in the tradition in 2019. Yet, similarly to last episode's jack-o'-lanterns, it may be reasonably expected that most people have never asked, or have only asked in passing, where the tradition came from. This Halloween tradition's history involves ancient Celtic tradition, medieval beggars, and juvenile delinquents. As with the previous episode, we return to the Celtic festival of Samhain. For a brief review, Samhain was a Celtic festival held on November 1st, when the Celts believed that the demons and other spirits would visit the living. Now, what is pertinent is that it was believed that the spirits could be fooled by disguises, and so people would dress themselves as demons for their own protection. This trend continued on into Christian tradition on the eve of All Hallows' Day, which was a holiday eventually used by the medieval church to replace Samhain. The Christian holiday also brought with it something that may be considered an ancestor of the modern candy hunt, known then as souling. In the old days, the poor and the very young would visit the houses of their more fortunate fellows, offering to sing for the homeowner, or to say a prayer for the soul of the homeowner's dead relatives, in exchange for a bit of money, drink, or food. One notable item that was handed out on All Hallows' Eve was the soul cake, a small pastry made with cinnamon, nutmeg, ginger, and raisins, with a small cross decorating the top of it. The idea was that it would represent a soul springing from hell or purgatory into eternal life. After the Reformation, many Protestants would reject the holiday, and as such, it did not make it into the New World until far later. Despite America's primarily Protestant origins, All Hallows' Eve traditions would appear in the United States, having been brought overseas by Irish immigrants fleeing famine in the 1840s. The first North American record of the tradition comes from a Canadian newspaper in the 1920s, where youngsters were then partaking in a much less friendly version of the modern tradition. The youngsters were said to have gone door to door asking for treats and playing so-called tricks on anyone who didn't hand anything over. These so-called tricks mainly involved destruction or misplacement of property, including the removal of gates, wagons, and other such items. An early example from the state of Illinois speaks of a similar strain of behavior. These pranks would move beyond simply inconveniencing their neighbors and could encroach into harassment territory. One act involved the removal of gates to allow the escape of livestock, and this was either significant enough or widespread enough to lead some people to refer to October 31st as Gate Night. Such alleged pranks began in rural areas but spread to cities, becoming more destructive. In Illinois, newspaper readers were encouraged to load muskets with salt, rocks, or even birdshot to drive away their harassers. It is said that the vandalism, as well as associated Halloween pranks, escalated from there, until there were instances of fatalities from both pranks gone awry as well as individuals acting in self-defense. Things became so heated that certain municipalities considered banning the holiday. However, what eventually happened instead was a community organization of Halloween festivities. Something like modern trick-or-treating did develop. However, it was more regulated than it had been before, in order to prevent such destruction as had appeared previously. This time, houses would voluntarily give out ingredients for making costumes, as well as candy. This was in the 1930s, and with the sugar rationing of the Second World War, such tradition was halted until after the war had ended. By the time of the 1950s, the tradition had become a part of American culture, although it has been said that old-time pranks, to use the term loosely, would continue in the Northeast and Midwest into the 1970s and 80s, including some amount of arson. With the history laid out before us, let us now turn to the terminology. The treat part is obvious. While the word trick appears to reference the old-time tradition of harassing individuals who did not partake in the festivities, the term trick-or-treat has changed a bit, with the earliest American example coming from a Michigan newspaper referring to tricks or treats in the year 1928. The term would persist even years later in a 1965 Peanuts comic strip, using the same term. However, at some point, at least where I live, the plural was dropped and is today known simply as trick-or-treat, with the words connected by hyphens. One cannot help but wonder about the future of this tradition, as there have been stories spread of razors and poison being put into candy that is handed out from houses. However, this is likely media hype, at least mostly, and many people seem not to take it very seriously. In recent years, we have seen the rise of trunk-or-treat gatherings, which may allow rural communities to partake in the tradition with less travel time between stops. So, even if the conventional tradition is slowly winding down, there may be ways in which it shall continue on in time. Regardless of where the old-time tradition is heading into the future, hopefully now you have an idea of where it's from and where it has been. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I wish you a very happy Halloween.